Yay, we're moving right along to the brim. So grab your brim pattern pieces. We can set our top and crown pieces together. We can set them somewhere, but we don't need them for right now. So here's our brim pattern pieces. So let's get sewing them. Okay, so the step is the same for either brim width. So if you're making the wide brimmed or the narrow brimmed hat, this is exactly the same for both, okay? So first things first here, we want to fold our brim in half lengthwise with the right sides together for both the lining and the main pattern. And then we're gonna just clip the ends. This is so far the same process as when we sewed up the crown pieces, so this should look familiar. Okay, and as I've said before, my fabric is the same on both sides, so I don't really have to worry too much about rights and wrongs, but you definitely want to pay attention to rights and wrongs if you have not utility fabric. Okay, so we've done that. Now we need to go back to our sewing machine and stitch using a 1/2 inch seam allowance on either end. So we're gonna stitch here and we're gonna repeat that for the lining, 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then you're gonna press the seam allowances open, just like we did for the crown when we made the crown. So just another reminder, if you're using utility fabrics that could melt, make sure you keep your iron on low or use a pressing cloth in between the layers of your iron and your fabric. All right, stitching at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Oh, make sure you have reset your stitch length and you're not still basting from that last step. All right, and do the same thing for the lining. Okay, let's go press at our iron. So even if you aren't doing a lining, you should still have 2 brim pieces. You need to have them. It's imperative for the construction of this to have 2 brim pieces, so you'd want to have 2 out of your mains. Just wanted to get that out there. So even if you're not calling, your second brim piece a lining, it's still, you should still have 2 at this point. So now we're going to place our brim pieces right sides together, matching the outer edge, and we're gonna pin them together. Let's get our right sides together, and I like matching them at the seam. So line up your seam pieces and clip or pin them in place all the way around. And I do find it easier to get the other side. So once we've got one clip in, it is really nice to get the other side clipped down too, just so you have that balance. Even if you want to, quarter points here, just get everything clipped, the four quarters, the circle, and then fill in your clips or pins around as you go around the circle. Okay, once you feel like you have enough clips or pins in it, we're going to go and stitch around the outside at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So we're going to go all the way around the outer edge and stitch 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, so we're stitching our brim pieces together, or 2 brims, 1/2 inch seam allowance here. Make sure you backstitch. got a teeny bump here. I'm gonna go back and fix that, okay? Alrighty, we've just stitched the 2 brim pieces together. What we need to do now is trim our seam allowances down approximately in half. So just once again, be careful not to trim through the stay stitching if you can help it. You want that extra stability. Man, my scissors are a bit of a joke right now. Guess I need to get them sharpened again. We'll move on to the next part, which is trimming little tiny notches all the way around into the seam. So you want to just make some snips. Now this probably will go through your stay stitching a little bit. You just want to make little snips every so often, like maybe every inch. This will help when we are turning the hat. Just make sure you do not clip into the actual seam, or you're going to have some holes in your hat. No one wants holes. No one wants a holy hat. Okay, once you feel happy with the amount of notches you've cut into your circle, we're gonna turn everything right side out and we're gonna give it a good press. So it might feel a little wonky right now, but I promise you it's gonna look amazing once you've pressed it. And if you have a contrasting lining, you just want to make sure it's rolled over so that you don't see it at all from the top edge of the hat, okay? So let's go press this. I'm gonna go press this off camera, but you're just pressing this seam down, okay? All right, hopefully you've given your brim a good strong press. Now what you want to do is top stitch all the way around the brim to just keep everything down and in its place. So if you're not happy with what you have done with your iron, go back to your iron and give it an even better good press, okay? And then we're going to top stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. We're top stitching the brims together at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So if you have a contrasting lining, you just want to make sure it's not showing. And when you're back to the start, just backstitch. Okay, so what we just did was stitch the brim here at about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. What we're going to do is repeat that a billion more times. I'm not exaggerating. We're going to repeat that until we get a 1/2 inch away from the inside part of the brim. So we're just gonna stitch around and around and around in a circle, top stitching a bunch more times, and we want to keep it at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm just gonna stitch a row, another row. I'm not gonna bore you with all of the stitching that this is going to take, but I'll just stitch another row for you to see. Make sure you back stitch on either side. And try to stick with that 1/4 inch seam allowance. And we're back where we started, back stitching. If you have trouble getting a perfect 1/4 inch seam allowance and you happen to have a 1/4 inch presser foot, I would highly recommend using that right now. It's a presser foot that comes with stitching quilts and things like that, but it will give you a perfect 1/4 inch seam allowance. So anyway, just a thought. Carry on.